What if the richest man in the world suddenly vanished, and no one knew why? That was the headline. It wasn't on a conspiracy blog or deep in some Reddit thread. No. It was front and center on major news outlets. CNN, Fox, even the BBC. Elon Musk, Tesla CEO, SpaceX founder, and the man who once smoked a blunt live on a podcast, was gone. No press release. No cryptic tweet. No camera crews. Just silence. At 6:42 a.m. Pacific Time, a private security feed from Elon's estate in Austin, Texas, went dark. Moments earlier, neighbors reported hearing helicopters. One claimed they saw a black SUV with no license plate reverse through the iron gates at speed. 2 dogs were barking non-stop. Then, nothing. No sirens. No alarms. Just the kind of silence that doesn't feel natural. But let's rewind, because this story doesn't start with flashing lights. It started with a warning. A quiet one. A message so subtle, most people would have dismissed it. Except Elon didn't. The night before his arrest, Elon hosted a dinner at his house. A handful of close friends, a couple of SpaceX engineers, and his teenage son, X. The mood was light, chili dogs, kombucha, a lot of inside jokes about AI alignment and flamethrowers. But Elon seemed distracted. Kept checking his phone, then locking it again without saying a word. "Something wrong?" asked Gwynne Shotwell, COO of SpaceX. She had known Elon long enough to spot the signs. He hesitated. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just paranoid." "Same thing in your case," she joked. He didn't laugh. At 10:13 p.m., Elon excused himself from the table and walked out to the patio. The Texas wind was dry and sharp, carrying the faint scent of mesquite. He pulled out a slim, matte black phone, not his usual. It wasn't connected to any carrier. Just Wi-Fi and encrypted messaging. A text had come in 10 minutes earlier from an anonymous number. "Do not appear in court Thursday. It's a setup. They're coming." Let's be clear, Elon Musk has received thousands of bizarre texts. From fans, haters, ex-girlfriends, even aliens if you believe his DMs. But this one was different. It referred to a court date that was supposed to be sealed. A private meeting between Musk's legal team and Judge Franklin Langford. On paper, it was about Starlink patents. But Elon already suspected something more was brewing. He didn't tell anyone about the text that night. Instead, he went back to the table, forced a smile, and joked about turning Mars into a second Earth, but without the politics. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that by morning, everything would implode. 6:37 a.m. X, still in pajamas, padded into the kitchen looking for cereal. The house was eerily quiet. No staff. No dad. Just the low hum of a refrigerator and the soft chirp of birds outside. He poured himself a bowl of Reese's Puffs and plopped onto the couch, flipping through a YouTube playlist. That's when the dogs started barking. At first, it sounded normal, just Tesla and Hawking doing their usual perimeter rounds. But then the tone changed. Snarling. Growling. A thud. 6:39 a.m. The screen in the living room flickered. For a split second, the security feed glitched, then froze. Elon's encrypted system was usually bulletproof. But this felt intentional. Then came the knock. Not a bang. A knock. X stood up, confused. No one knocked at the front door, not here. Every guest had a code, every delivery came through a side entrance. He opened the door slightly, just enough to see a man in a dark suit holding a badge. FBI. We're here for your father. Meanwhile, Elon was downstairs, in his subterranean office. He'd been up since 5 a.m., scanning a digital forensics dump given to him by a whistleblower, an ex-court clerk who worked directly under Judge Langford. The files pointed to something deeply unsettling: encrypted communications between Langford and private tech lobbyists, conversations about suppressing emerging AI platforms deemed socially destabilizing. And guess what? Neuralink and XAI were at the top of the list. Suddenly, the monitors in front of him went dark. His hand flew to a small red button under the desk, his emergency shutdown protocol. Before he could press it, the door burst open. "Mr. Musk," a voice called out. "You're under arrest. Stand down." Elon turned slowly, his face unreadable. "For what?" The agent didn't answer. "Just cuffed him." 7:05 a.m. The news broke before the sun fully rose. At first, it was just a whisper. A single tweet from @whistleblower99. Breaking: Elon Musk taken by federal agents. No charges publicly listed. Developing. Then came the live stream clip, just 5 seconds, taken from a drone someone had hidden near Elon's fence. It showed him being escorted into a black vehicle, his face calm, hands behind his back. He looked directly into the camera, as if he knew it was there. People lost their minds. YouTubers spun theories. Some said it was the government silencing Elon over AI. Others claimed it had to do with SpaceX contracts. One wild Reddit thread even suggested he staged the whole thing to go off-grid and build a colony on the moon. But the real truth? It's darker. Stranger. And yes, completely, unbelievably real. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from, the narrator of a viral documentary trailer says later that day. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The screen fades to black with 5 haunting words. This can't be made up. 3 months earlier, Elon stood alone at the edge of his private Starbase launch pad in Boca Chica, Texas. The ocean breeze whipped through his hair, the salt thick in the air, the hum of distant machinery blending with crashing waves. He stared up at a gleaming silver rocket, fully stacked, ready for another round of testing. But his mind wasn't on the launch. Not anymore. His phone buzzed. It was a private message from an encrypted Signal account. No name. Just a text. "Langford has eyes on you." Starlink was the first red flag. He stared at it for a long moment before deleting it. Then he turned, walked back to the hangar, and didn't say a word to anyone about what he'd seen. Elon Musk wasn't new to controversy. Hell, he lived in controversy. Twitter spats, SEC lawsuits, rogue tweets that cost Tesla billions in market cap, he'd done it all. And somehow, he always came out on top. But this? This wasn't noise. This felt calculated. Cold. Dangerous. He started noticing the signs shortly after he rebranded Twitter as X. Government regulators began circling with more aggression. Not just SEC or FTC, they were used to that. This time, it was federal court orders, sealed memos, routine audits that just happened to involve all his major companies at once. And at the center of every subpoena? One name kept popping up in legal documents: Judge Franklin Langford. Judge Langford wasn't exactly a household name, but in the world of federal power brokers, he carried weight. Harvard Law. Military background. Rose fast through the judicial ranks during an administration known for stacking tech-related benches with pro-regulation heavyweights. Publicly, Langford played the part of a constitutional purist. Privately, sources claimed he was obsessed with AI regulation and had a deep, almost philosophical hatred of unchecked corporate autonomy. To Elon, that sounded suspiciously like code for "control the innovators." At first, Elon brushed it off. The occasional legal push was normal. But then came the first official notice. It arrived via Tesla's general counsel, printed on old-school legal stock, complete with embossing and a Department of Justice seal. A court order, Langford's signature at the bottom, requesting Elon's personal appearance for a preliminary judicial inquiry regarding satellite usage and potential cross-border digital influence. He read it twice. "What the hell is a judicial inquiry?" he muttered. "It's vague on purpose," said Tesla's legal chief, Martha Green. "But this isn't normal. A sitting federal judge calling in a private citizen, outside of criminal or civil charges? That's unheard of. It's like a shadow hearing." "Decline it," Elon said flatly. "You can't just." "I can," he replied. "And I will." That same week, a Tesla vehicle exploded in a Denver garage. Lithium-ion failure, allegedly. But Elon had seen the report. It wasn't thermal runaway. The logs showed software tampering. Remote override attempts. The engineers were stunned. "There's no way that code came from us." He started connecting the dots. Langford. Court orders. Satellite influence. Tesla sabotage. Someone was turning the screws. Late one night, he invited a small circle of trusted allies to a meeting at his Austin home. Just 6 people. 2 from SpaceX, 1 from xAI, 1 former NSA advisor now working freelance cybersecurity, and his longtime friend and partner in chaos, Jack Dorsey. They gathered in Elon's underground tech lab, no cell phones allowed. Just hardwired secure systems and voice scramblers on every mic. He laid it all out, the subpoenas, the strange behavior in Starlink nodes, even a brief blip on the DoD contract radar involving Neuralink. But it was the judge's name, Langford, that kept resurfacing. Jack leaned back, eyes narrowed. "You think he's rogue?" "I think," Elon said slowly, "he's not acting alone." The ex-NSA guy, David Lang, was the first to mention Project Orpheus, a rumored federal initiative where judges worked with select tech firms and intelligence agencies to monitor and control potentially destabilizing digital leaders. "Urban legend," Lang said. But if it's real, Langford would be the type. Elon wasn't sure he believed it. But then again, he hadn't believed half the stuff he ended up living through either. By the end of the night, everyone agreed on one thing: this wasn't just a legal issue. This was personal. Back in his office the next morning, Elon stared at an open tab on his computer screen, a video from 2016, Langford giving a speech on algorithmic governance and the future of democracy. At the time, it had barely gotten 200 views. But one line caught Elon's attention. "The age of corporate sovereignty must end. Regulation isn't just oversight, it's protection from unchecked ambition." It chilled him. Because the next slide in Langford's presentation? A picture of Elon's face. He began ramping up his own investigations. Quietly. Pulled in former intelligence contractors. Had a team comb through court rulings. Discovered that every major AI company subpoenaed in the last year had come through Langford's court first. OpenAI. Anthropic. DeepMind's US projects. The man was building something. Or tearing something down. And then came the last straw. One of Elon's close engineers received a package at her home, a flash drive, labeled simply Mindlock. No return address. No metadata. Inside were fragments of a program designed for neural data interception, technology years ahead of anything on the market. Embedded deep in the code were signatures pointing to a federal lab. Not a company. A government contractor. With one common legal connection. Judge Langford. Elon stood in his kitchen, pouring coffee, when his son X asked him, "Are we going to Mars soon, Dad?" He smiled. "Not yet." "Why not?" "Because Earth's got problems I need to fix first." To understand the storm Elon Musk was walking into, you first had to understand the man himself, not the tweets, not the headlines, but the path that shaped him. Because long before he was the richest man on Earth, before SpaceX and Neuralink, before electric cars and underground tunnels, Elon was just a kid with a bruised face and a head full of impossible ideas. He was born in Pretoria, South Africa, in 1971. His childhood wasn't defined by warmth or ease. It was defined by books. "I was raised by books. And then by my mother," he once said. His mother, May Musk, was a model and dietitian who worked hard and raised her kids to be tough. His father, Elon Musk, was a brilliant but abusive man, mechanical genius, emotional disaster. Elon didn't fit in at school. He was small, quiet, and spoke with a clipped accent that made him stand out. He got beaten up. A lot. Once, a group of boys threw him down a flight of stairs and beat him so badly, he couldn't breathe. He was hospitalized for a week. But during those lonely hours in bed, he read The Lord of the Rings. Foundation. Hitchhiker's Guide. He absorbed every book he could find, obsessed with stories of far-off galaxies and flawed heroes saving broken worlds with courage and logic. It wasn't an escape. It was a blueprint. By age 12, he built and sold his first video game, Blaster. The code was clunky, but it worked. He sent it to a tech magazine and earned $500. He never spent it. Because Elon wasn't motivated by money. He never was. What drove him, what still drives him, is possibility. The idea that if something isn't real, it's only because no one's built it yet. That mindset took him across the world to Canada at 17. He slept on couches, did odd jobs, and eventually made his way to the University of Pennsylvania. He studied economics and physics. He told his friends that the three things that mattered for the future of humanity were the internet, renewable energy, and space. Then he dropped out of a Stanford PhD program after 2 days. Because the internet wasn't going to wait. With his brother Kimball, Elon founded Zip2, an early online business directory. He coded like a machine, sleeping in the office, showering at the YMCA. At one point, he was living on $30 a week. Compaq bought Zip2 in 1999 for $307 million. Elon was 27. His share, $22 million. He poured most of it into his next company, X.com, a digital banking startup that would later become PayPal. You've heard that story, too: internal politics, a board coup, and eventually, eBay bought PayPal for $1.5 billion. Elon walked away with $180 million. He didn't buy a mansion. He didn't disappear. He built rockets. SpaceX was born from obsession. Elon believed NASA had gotten too safe, too slow, too scared. He wanted to colonize Mars, not for bragging rights, but for survival. A backup drive for humanity, he called it. The early days of SpaceX were chaos. 3 failed launches. Millions lost. Engineers crying on launch pads. People told him it would never work. That he was crazy. Then came Falcon 1, Flight 4. It launched. It made orbit. Everything changed. Tesla came next, though Elon didn't start it, he invested and then took over. The company was ridiculed in its early years. Legacy car manufacturers laughed. Wall Street doubted. The government shrugged. But Elon kept pushing. He slept on the factory floor. He personally oversaw production issues. He once said, "If something's important enough, you do it even if the odds are against you." That's how Tesla survived 2008. That's how it became the most valuable car company on Earth. Neuralink, The Boring Company, SolarCity, OpenAI, XAI. Elon built companies like other people built Lego sets. One stacked atop the next, interlocking pieces of a vision to push humanity forward. But the deeper he went into AI and brain-computer interfaces, the more he noticed the resistance. Not from the public. From institutions. In 2002, Elon experienced the greatest heartbreak of his life. His first son, Nevada, died of SIDS at just 10 weeks old. He rarely talks about it. But those who know him say that moment cracked something inside him, shifted his view on control, on death, on how fleeting and fragile life could be. He went back to work 2 days later. Some call that cold. He called it survival. Over the years, Elon made enemies. Not just critics, powerful enemies. Regulatory bodies. Lobbyists. Executives with deep ties to government agencies. People who didn't like that one man could command the attention of the world with 280 characters. He once tweeted, "I'd rather be useful than liked." It wasn't bravado. It was armor. As 2023 rolled into 2024, Elon began to notice changes. Certain people stopped returning his calls. Government contracts went silent. Key Starlink launches were delayed, not by SpaceX, but by red tape. Then came the reports from insiders. Rumors that he was being watched, that certain court circuits were actively seeking ways to challenge his growing influence, especially in AI. His inner circle urged caution. But Elon kept building. There's a picture on Elon's desk at his Austin home. It's not of Mars or a Tesla. It's of him, holding baby XAE-812 in one arm, Nevada's name engraved on a pendant around his neck. He looks exhausted. He also looks unbreakable. Because before he was a billionaire, Elon Musk was just a boy who got beaten down a flight of stairs, and stood back up. And now, he was about to face something bigger than market crashes or exploding rockets. Something darker than bad press or SEC investigations. This time, it wasn't about his companies. It was about him. There are moments in your life when reality tilts, when something happens so out of place, so absolutely impossible, that it forces you to question everything you know. This was one of those moments. It was 2:07 a.m. on a Tuesday when Elon's inbox pinged. Not his public one. Not even the one his executive team used. This inbox was buried under layers of encryption, firewalled by custom protocols written by XAI, and physically isolated from all internet-connected systems. It wasn't supposed to receive anything unsolicited. And yet, here it was. Subject: Judicial Watch, Confidential. From Langford_court seal at protonmail.com. No attachments. No introduction. Just a single line. If you testify, you will disappear. This isn't a threat. It's a pattern. At first, Elon assumed it was a prank. A well-informed, disturbingly accurate prank, but still, he had enemies, trolls, even bored hackers who tried this kind of thing for attention. But something about the wording stopped him cold. He forwarded it to David Lang, the ex-NSA cybersecurity consultant working with him. Within 10 minutes, Lang was calling him on a secure line. "Don't touch anything," he said, breathing hard. "That email wasn't spoofed." "What do you mean?" "I mean it originated from inside the judicial server system. Someone accessed Proton Mail through a hidden node routed through a government proxy. This thing passed every forensic trace. Elon, it came from within the federal courts." Elon's pulse tightened. What do they mean by a pattern? Lang was silent. Then, "I think they mean you won't be the first." They started digging. Elon had one of his Neuralink engineers reassign 2 staff members to a full-time Intel task force, codename Shadow Pulse. Their job? Investigate every high-profile tech or science leader who had been suddenly shut down, ruined, discredited, or quietly disappeared over the past 5 years. The patterns were subtle. A climate data researcher found dead in his Colorado cabin, ruled a suicide, though the coroner's report had inconsistencies. An AI ethics professor at MIT forced into retirement after a mysterious scandal no one could confirm. A promising young biotech CEO whose company was bought out under legal pressure, he vanished to South America and stopped communicating with everyone. Each of them had one thing in common: they had testified, or planned to testify, about powerful, emerging technologies that threatened centralized control. And all of them, Elon would later learn, had one legal signature buried somewhere in their case files. Judge Franklin Langford. In that moment, Elon knew this wasn't about patents. It wasn't about satellites. It wasn't even about AI. It was about control. Someone was building a system to quietly silence outliers, especially those with enough reach to disrupt the future's approved timeline. A few days later, a brown envelope arrived at SpaceX HQ. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. On it, a photocopy of a courtroom transcript. Dated, June 2019. Case, US v. Carter Robotics. Judge, F. Langford. Buried in the transcript was a passage that made Elon sit down. Langford, to defense. Your client misunderstands. Innovation without supervision becomes disruption. And we regulate disruption, not because we fear it, but because we understand what it does to empires. That sentence was underlined. Twice. You realize what this means, right? Gwynne Shotwell asked, looking at the document. Langford isn't just a rogue judge. He's part of a doctrine. A doctrine? Yeah. One that thinks the future should be guided, not invented. Elon's face darkened. Then we're not fighting policy, he said. We're fighting ideology. That night, Elon made a decision. He would not cancel his appearance at the hearing, no matter the risk. If they wanted to come for him, they'd have to do it in the open. He issued a tweet that sent a ripple through the internet. Sometimes disruption isn't a bug. It's a rescue mission. The reply threads exploded. Some fans called it cryptic genius. Others called it a warning shot. A few, who understood the deeper tension between tech innovation and federal control, simply posted a single word. Langford. What no one knew was that within 48 hours of that tweet, Elon would be in handcuffs, and the world would be forced to ask one terrifying question. Why would the government arrest the man building its future? If you searched Franklin Langford's name before Elon's arrest, you'd find the basics. Harvard Law. Decorated veteran. Federal bench appointment in 2014. A few high-profile tech antitrust rulings. Reputation for being sharp, fair, and quietly intense. But if you tried to dig deeper, beyond the legal databases, beyond the press releases, you found something strange. You found nothing. No interviews. No social media. No leaked deposition videos. Not even a casual op-ed in The Atlantic or a conference panel recorded on YouTube. It was as if someone had manicured his online presence with surgical precision. Just the right amount of visibility to appear legitimate, yet scrubbed clean of everything else. And that's what made Elon suspicious. Because in a world where everyone left a footprint, Langford left a shadow. He's either incredibly private or professionally hidden, said David Lang, analyzing the judge's digital record with Elon. No traceable metadata. No location history. No financial slips. This is intelligence-grade cleanup. CIA? Elon asked. Maybe. But my gut says this is black-budget judicial protection. If Langford's name is attached to something big, it's not just law, it's policy infrastructure. That word again. Infrastructure. Elon hated that word. Not because of what it meant, but because of how it was used by those who sought to control rather than build. They didn't want to create, they wanted to stabilize. And that meant anything new, powerful, or unpredictable had to be regulated, or erased. And Langford? Langford was the eraser. The first real clue came from a former court assistant. Her name was Samantha Reyes. 29. Nervous. Exasperated. She didn't reach out to Elon directly. She contacted a contact of a contact who had once worked on a Solar City lobbying team. Her message was simple: I have something. I'm scared. They met at a parking garage in downtown Austin. Yes, it felt cliché, like something out of a Netflix thriller. But that's where she insisted. Elon sent someone he trusted, Martha Green, Tesla's legal chief. Samantha handed over a flash drive in an unmarked envelope. I didn't steal anything, she whispered. I just copied what wasn't locked. What is it? Martha asked. Records. Internal memos. Draft subpoenas. Conversations that shouldn't exist. Then she said something Elon would never forget. Langford doesn't just rule. He directs. Back at Elon's private server farm, Lang ran a clean sweep of the flash drive. No viruses. No backdoors. Just .pdfs and .docs files, court documentation, legal prep sheets, and a few handwritten notes scanned from legal pads. The files contained internal memos labeled SOCAP protocols. No acronym explanation. But the memos had headings like Provisional Restraint for Non-Cooperative Disruptive Entities. Phase 2 Application of Digital Regulation Framework, Pre-Indictment Strategy. SOCAP identified actors with refusal to comply patterns, status Musk, E. In one file, Elon's name was circled in red. Beneath it. Monitor. Redirect if cooperative. Silence if resistant. He stared at the screen in silence. That's a hit list, Gwynn said from behind him. And you're at the top. It started to make sense. The bizarre subpoenas. The blacked-out financial reviews. The sudden questioning of Neuralink's clinical trials. Even the delays in FAA approval for Starship launches. It was death by 1,000 bureaucratic cuts. Langford wasn't acting alone. He was the judicial spear tip of something much larger, an unspoken alliance between regulation-hungry lawmakers, federal tech advisors, and enforcement agencies scared of disruption at scale. But that alliance had a flaw. It underestimated Elon's resilience. Publicly, Langford remained silent. No statements. No press comments. Even after Elon's arrest, when journalists begged for details, the federal courts issued only a vague statement. The Department of Justice is evaluating matters regarding Elon Musk. At this time, no further comment is available. Translation: we're improvising. Inside the courtroom, Langford was calm, cold, and concise. The charge? Obstruction of sovereign regulatory inquiry. A phrase so vague Elon's lawyers didn't know if they were defending a free speech case or a national security trial. Outside the courtroom, chaos reigned. Protesters lined the streets in Austin. Some were Musk superfans. Others were free speech advocates, AI ethics watchdogs, crypto-libertarians, and even anti-government fringe groups who believed this was step one toward digital martial law. The media called it the Musk trial. But Elon knew better. This wasn't a trial. It was a warning. That night, in a private holding room, Elon met briefly with his lead attorney, under supervision. They're not going for conviction, she told him. They're going for character assassination. Exactly. They want to plant doubt. Taint your projects. Delay your contracts. Let the system bury you in process until you're irrelevant. Elon's lips barely moved. Then we don't give them that. Outside, Judge Langford was seen leaving through a private underground exit. No photos. No press. But one young freelance journalist, hiding behind a maintenance truck, caught a moment on his phone. Langford paused at the garage ramp, pulled out his phone, and checked a message. Then he smiled. And said aloud, to no one in particular. We warned him. The clip went viral within 2 hours. April 3rd. 2 days after Elon's courtroom appearance. Across North America, satellites glitched. At exactly 11:44 a.m. Eastern Time, users from Chicago to Los Angeles lost GPS signal for 7.2 seconds. Commercial airliners rerouted mid-air. Military communication systems went offline. Smartphones froze on weather apps. And above it all, Starlink's orbital telemetry spiked, violently. Inside SpaceX's Hawthorne Control Center, every screen lit up red. "Is this a solar flare?" one engineer shouted. "No. Too localized," another replied. "This is targeted interference." Targeted. That word echoed across the room like a gunshot. By 11:47 a.m., backup systems had restored 94% of Starlink's functionality. But Elon's private admin dashboard, a system only 4 people on Earth had access to, was still offline. And then came the email. From anon@obscura.net. Subject: "The sky isn't yours anymore." Body: "SOCAP is in live testing. You will be the first and last warning." Elon, still technically under house restriction, read it in his Austin home. He was dressed casually, black tee, no shoes, but his mind was on fire. "They're hijacking orbital space," he muttered. Lang looked up from his laptop. "You think this is related to Langford?" "I don't think," Elon said. "I know." He turned to Gwyn, who had been quietly coordinating SpaceX's encrypted backup uplinks. "Run the SHIELD protocol." She blinked. "You want to isolate the entire Starlink mesh. If they're in our constellation, I want to know exactly where. And when." By 12:02 p.m., Starlink was in hard partition mode, a defensive state built for digital warfare. It split the entire network into thousands of independent nodes, rendering it nearly impossible to control from a single point. It was a risky move. But it worked. Within minutes, Lang's team traced a synthetic signal mimicking Starlink's control key. It didn't come from SpaceX. Or Tesla. Or any known government partner. It originated from a facility outside Arlington, Virginia. From a building labeled Judicial Oversight Commission, Subdivision 7. "That's not a real oversight office," Lang said, scrolling through the federal directory. "That division doesn't exist on public record. It's a ghost department. And it's inside our network," Elon replied. They moved fast. Gwyn assembled a private team of 10 top engineers and comm specialists. Elon tapped into xAI's neural model, Daemon, to cross-reference SOCAP phrases from the earlier files. Meanwhile, Lang's AI systems worked overtime to decrypt a payload embedded in the network interference. And what they found was worse than a glitch. It was a kill switch. Buried inside the spoofed control sequence was a silent trigger, a digital time bomb designed to erase satellite data, reroute communications, and simulate a system collapse. Its name: Valkyrie. And in its target line, among thousands of data points, sat one priority entry. Flag Elon_Musk_user ID_Alpha01. It wasn't just a random satellite breach. It was personal. "Langford isn't just overseeing a legal war," Elon said, his voice low. "He's running a black site-level tech op." "But why now?" Gwyn asked. "Why not years ago?" Elon looked out the window, where a Falcon Heavy poster hung above his piano. "Because I didn't scare them until now." Later that day, in a closed-door White House briefing, a high-ranking official from the Department of Defense asked the question no one wanted to say out loud. "Has Elon Musk become a national security risk?" Someone else in the room answered quietly. "No. But to Langford and his people, he's a sovereignty risk. And that's worse." Meanwhile, the public was noticing. #SkyGlitch was trending worldwide. Amateur astronomers posted screenshots of satellites blinking out mid-path. Aviation nerds uploaded flight maps showing erratic movement over major cities. No one had answers. But conspiracy theorists had a field day. Musk satellites hacked by deep state. Starlink weaponized, government cover-up coming. This is what happens when billionaires fight empires. That night, Elon posted a single tweet. Imagine thinking you own the sky, only to realize someone else wrote your firmware. Back at SpaceX, the final trace came in. The rogue signal that activated Valkyrie. It pinged once through a secure military gateway. And the login token used for access. Langford.Courtkey.7. The message was clear. This wasn't a glitch. It was a test. And Elon had just passed it. But what came next? That would be the real war. The encrypted payload came in broken pieces. Lang and Demon, Elon's custom XAI model, spent 32 hours stitching together fragments from the spoofed Starlink breach. Each packet was like a puzzle piece floating in static, full of court notations, code names, blurred timelines, and eerie one-line memos. But at 3:14 a.m., Demon rendered the first full file. SOCAP_DOC_47B, Directive for Disruption Mitigation. It was labeled top frame only, a classification reserved for information restricted even within intelligence circles. And it began with a sentence that changed everything. Emergent tech entities operating beyond oversight must be controlled, discredited, or eliminated before adaptive influence reaches cultural tipping point. Beneath that. 3 names. Elon Musk. Dr. Kira Tomlin, XAI co-founder, deceased 2022, officially, aneurysm. Ben Ralston, Meta's former XR division head, resigned 2021, missing since 2023. Each name linked to a case file. Each case file bore the same judge's signature. F. Langford. Elon stood in silence, staring at the holographic projection of the document in his Austin compound's war room. Cultural tipping point, he repeated, his voice low. They're not afraid of machines. They're afraid of momentum. Lang nodded. They think tech moves faster than law. Faster than democracy. So they made their own law. And used the courts to enforce it. Gwynn stepped forward. You know what this is, right? This isn't about AI. Or Mars. Or Twitter. It's about narrative control. No, Elon said, his voice sharper now. It's about reality control. They dove into the files deeper. One folder, labeled RAL_89, subnet, contained transcripts from surveillance intercepts on Ben Ralston, the Meta XR executive who vanished after building a prototype that reportedly enabled shared consciousness experiences through VR. The transcript read like science fiction. Ralston described synthetic telepathy, emotional mapping, and simulated environments so real users would forget their biological bodies existed. Then came the redacted section, and one chilling line that wasn't blacked out. Langford said if I don't stop, they'll frame me for something I didn't do. He smiled when he said it. Ralston vanished a month later. His condo in Palo Alto was found empty. No signs of struggle. His phone was left on the kitchen counter with 12 missed calls from an unlisted number. Meta called it a mental health leave. But the leaked internal Slack messages told a different story. Langford's team called again. Said Ralston's projects threaten the optics of the initiative. We've been instructed to freeze XR beyond L5. L5 stood for Level 5 immersion, a phase in VR development that crossed the threshold into full sensory override. The kind of tech that changes people. The kind of tech that can't be controlled once it spreads. Back in Austin, Demon revealed something else, the files weren't leaked randomly. They were deliberately tagged with a neural signature. Kira Tomlin's neural signature. The woman who co-founded XAI. The woman who died suddenly, a medical anomaly, they were told. But now. Demon's biometric trace showed she had encrypted these SOCAP files 6 weeks after her death was officially declared. Elon stared at the data for a long time. She knew, he whispered. Kira had been working on a subnetwork called Lighthouse, a secret project inside XAI's vault. It was designed to preemptively identify social manipulation patterns using language, emotion, and neural mapping. Lighthouse had been shelved after her death. Or so everyone thought. But now, Demon found hidden code embedded in the leaked SOCAP data. A message. 4 words. The court is code. It didn't make sense at first. Until Lang made the connection. Wait, he said, pulling up an old dev log. If Kira was right, then maybe Langford isn't just using the court system. He paused. Maybe he's running a parallel one. A synthetic court. What do you mean? Gwyn asked. I mean a logic-based adjudication engine, modeled after judicial decision-making, trained on real federal rulings and decisions. It could mimic patterns, simulate legal logic, even produce court orders that seem authentic. Elon's eyes narrowed. You're saying Langford built a fake court? Lang hesitated. No. I'm saying, someone built it. And Langford's just the face. That would explain the anomalies. The rapid court orders. The impossible subpoenas. The speed at which entire lawsuits were filed, ruled, and executed without oversight. A synthetic court. Running inside federal infrastructure. Signed off by a real judge who was no longer fully in control. Or worse, fully complicit. Outside, the press was still fixated on Elon's arrest. Headlines obsessed over his tweets, court appearances, and a rumor that Neuralink had begun experimenting on military veterans. It hadn't, not yet, anyway. But beneath the noise, something seismic was shifting. A few rogue whistleblowers in tech started hinting at buried files. Former NASA officials quietly reached out to Tesla board members. And inside the Pentagon, a junior analyst flagged a keyword in a satellite report. Valkyrie status, shadow active. She marked it for her supervisor. It was deleted 2 hours later. At SpaceX, Elon met with his inner circle. These files are the proof, he said. We have names, code, dates, and dead witnesses. Gwyn crossed her arms. So what now? We leak it? Elon looked at her. His expression was calm. Too calm. No, he said. We launch it. She frowned. Launch what? He turned to the holographic display of the SOCAP files. Everything. Through the satellites. Through the mesh. Through Lighthouse. You want to beam it into people's devices? I want to make truth go viral, faster than lies ever could. Lang looked up. And if they trace it back to you? Elon smiled. They already arrested me. What more are they gonna do? Ban me from Earth? Elon sat in his war room, his fingers hovering over the console. The hum of the servers filled the room as his engineers worked furiously in the background, verifying the latest calculations. The goal was simple, yet terrifying in its implications, to upload the truth. Everything. All of it. The SOCAP files. The synthetic court protocols. The dark deals between Langford, government officials, and tech giants. The truth wasn't just about exposing corruption. It was about creating a reality that couldn't be denied. For months, Langford had manipulated the legal system to suppress any technological advancement that could challenge the current power structure. Now, it was time to flip the script. But the question wasn't whether the truth could be exposed. The question was how to make sure it reached everyone, everywhere, before they could stop it. We're ready, Gwyn said, looking at the main terminal. The upload sequence had been verified, the encryption bypassed, and the satellite network was primed to distribute the data. Elon's eyes narrowed as he studied the screen. What's the first target? We're starting with the networks, Lang responded. Twitter, Reddit, Instagram. We push it through every content feed, every algorithm. And then? Then, We move to the neural mesh, Lang said. The upload will bypass traditional media and hit people directly, embedding the truth into every connected device, even without their consent. Elon smiled. It'll be viral before anyone realizes it. But even as the upload protocol began, something in the back of Elon's mind nagged at him. He had spent years pushing the boundaries of what was possible, building technologies that could change the world. But now, for the first time, he wasn't just an inventor or an entrepreneur. He was a disruptor, a man willing to burn the old systems down in order to rebuild them. And this was the moment of no return. At the same time, Langford's team was moving fast. They had caught wind of the upload attempt, or at least, the sudden surge of activity across the satellite network. Their emergency response teams went into overdrive, scrambling to contain the breach. But Langford knew there was something bigger at play. He watched as the clock ticked closer to the upload window. The moment was coming, and he couldn't afford to let Elon succeed. But despite his best efforts, there was a problem: the upload was already live. Shut it down. Langford barked at his team. But it was too late. The first signs of the upload were subtle at first. A few users on social media began posting cryptic messages. Others shared screenshots of a single phrase that kept appearing. "The system is rigged." In minutes, that phrase was everywhere. It spread like wildfire. People who had never heard of Elon Musk or the SOCAP files began to ask questions. Was this a hack? Was this a new conspiracy theory? Or was it something more? In an underground bunker somewhere in Washington, a group of government officials watched the situation unfold. They had been anticipating this moment. They knew Elon Musk would eventually break, but they hadn't predicted how fast it would happen. "He's uploading the files," one of the officials said, his voice trembling. "He's doing it right now." "Can we stop it?" another asked. "Not unless we turn off the entire satellite network." That was exactly what Elon was counting on. Back at SpaceX, the upload reached critical mass. The data packets began streaming through the Starlink satellites, bypassing traditional servers, encrypting themselves across multiple nodes, and spreading outwards in every direction. Within minutes, the files were embedded in billions of devices: phones, tablets, smart speakers, and even self-driving cars. At first, it looked like chaos. People began watching the data unfold on their devices, seeing images of Langford's confidential memos, internal government communications, and records that exposed the deep web of control that had been quietly running the world. The system wasn't just a corruption of the courts. It was the architecture of a silent dictatorship. It wasn't just information anymore. It was a movement. A revolution that had no leader, no manifesto, and no single place where it could be stopped. Elon watched the results on his terminal with a mixture of satisfaction and dread. The data was now public. The world could no longer ignore what had been hidden from them. But the real test was just beginning. How long before Langford retaliates? Gwyn asked, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "Not long," Elon replied. "They'll come after me, and they'll come after us." Lang looked at the screen. "Elon, we need to get ready for the fallout. We need to protect the core systems. If Langford pulls the trigger on Valkyrie, everything goes dark." Elon paused, considering the enormity of it all. "Then we'll need to be ready for a blackout." By the time the world's media outlets caught on, it was too late. The truth had already been shared, digested, and reshaped into its own narrative. Langford's influence was no longer enough to control the public perception. People began organizing. They demanded accountability. They called for an end to the covert manipulation of the legal system, an end to the backroom deals that had kept them in the dark for so long. But Langford wasn't done yet. At the same moment that Elon's network was in full swing, Langford was already preparing his counterstrike. In the heart of Washington, a room full of high-ranking officials gathered for an emergency meeting. They had been waiting for this moment, and they weren't going to let a rogue billionaire disrupt their entire system. The clock was ticking. Langford was in control. Or so he thought. Back at SpaceX, the countdown began. A countdown to a new world. But as the clock ticked down, Elon knew that the real battle had just begun. The storm came fast. Within hours of Elon's upload, the world had erupted in chaos. Social media feeds were flooded with the files, the truth about Langford, the court systems, the covert operations. People were rioting, demanding investigations, cutting ties with corporations, and questioning everything they'd once believed. But somewhere, deep within the bowels of the Pentagon, a darker plan was being set in motion. Langford wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. In the chaos of the public exposure, Langford and his allies within the government had already initiated Valkyrie, a plan designed for just this kind of emergency. The upload had been successful, but now, it was time for the blackout. Elon was watching the news coverage when it all went dark. The satellite signals from SpaceX's Starlink network flickered for a split second. Then, the world's communication systems began to shut down. The screens in his war room blinked off, and the hum of the servers stopped. It wasn't just his network, it was everything. Phones. TVs, radios. They all went silent. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Langford activated it, Lang said from his post. He was already typing furiously, attempting to bypass the blackout protocol that was spreading like wildfire. The lights in the room flickered. Valkyrie is live, Elon confirmed. It's blocking all satellite communications, all direct data transmission. They've got a kill switch on everything. Outside, the streets of Austin were eerily quiet. People were staring at their blank devices, confused and frightened. They didn't know what had just happened, but they knew something massive was at play. Gwyn leaned against a terminal, looking at the flashing red lights indicating the communications shutdown. They've got us in a corner, she said. How do we fight back if we can't even talk to each other? By not needing to talk, Elon replied. Valkyrie is just a stopgap. They can block signals, but they can't block the truth we've already spread. Lang's fingers flew across the keyboard. Elon's right. But we need to regain control of the mesh. I'll deploy the secondary subnet. It's designed to bypass direct uplinks. You sure it'll work? Gwyn asked, looking at Lang. Lang met her eyes. We don't have a choice. The countdown on the wall was ticking down, T-minus 48 hours until the full blackout would take effect globally. The longer the blackout lasted, the harder it would be to break free of the control Langford had over the system. Lang's fingers didn't stop. Initiating subnet now, he muttered, pressing a final sequence of keys. But then, a crackling sound. The screens flickered back to life. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the data began to flow again, but this time, it wasn't just on SpaceX's network. It was spreading faster than before, reaching further out into the world, pushing against the walls Langford had erected. Elon stood up and leaned over Lang's shoulder, staring at the screen. What's happening? Lang grinned. The subnet worked. They can't stop it. We're pushing data through their own lines, encrypted, untraceable, but faster than they can shut it down. Gwyn let out a breath. You did it. For now, they had won a small victory. But Langford was relentless. In his underground operations center, he watched the live feed of SpaceX's counterattack. His eyes narrowed. This wasn't over yet. He knew something Elon didn't. Valkyrie had been designed not just as a communications shutdown, but as a neural network override. The shutdown wasn't just affecting devices, it was affecting human perception. The blackout wasn't just an information blockade. It was also an attempt to control how people thought. Langford's tech had already begun to influence certain key figures who were still connected, from government officials to corporate leaders. They were being fed a narrative designed to reshape their priorities, weaken their resolve, and steer them back into the system. The clock was ticking, but Langford had a contingency plan. Back at the SpaceX compound, Elon watched as his team worked around the clock to push the truth into the world through the subnet. Despite the blackout, they were seeing increased traffic on their encrypted pathways. People were starting to wake up, one by one. The truth was spreading. But Elon knew that every second they gained was a second closer to Langford unleashing his next move. "We need to go faster," he said, his voice steady but urgent. "Already on it," Lang replied, as his fingers danced across the terminal. "Once this subnet establishes itself, we can use mesh nodes to distribute data at a local level, through every device connected to the mesh. It'll bypass Valkyrie's firewall." "What's the catch?" Gwyn asked. Lang didn't look up. "The catch is that once we do it, there's no going back. Langford will know where we're coming from. He'll target us directly. If we don't act fast enough, then we lose," Elon finished. "I know." As the final countdown began, T-12 hours, Elon and his team pushed their technology to its limits. The blackout was still sweeping across the world, but the subnet was beginning to take root. Elon's goal was clear: he wasn't just fighting to restore the flow of information. He was fighting to rewrite the future. In that darkened room, where silence had overtaken the world, Elon Musk wasn't just the target of a conspiracy anymore. He had become the center of a revolution. And it was a revolution with no clear end. The final countdown had become a ticking bomb. Elon's team was working in overdrive, trying to maintain control of the subnet as Valkyrie's system began to retaliate. The blackout was still widespread, but Elon and his engineers had managed to work around the shutdown, bypassing Langford's carefully constructed walls. The data was flowing, and the world was waking up. But Langford wasn't going to let this stand. From his underground bunker, he had already begun activating the next phase of his plan, a direct strike on SpaceX's infrastructure. The firewall wasn't just a digital barrier, it was a fortress, built over years of research and secrecy. To get past it would take more than technology. It would require the kind of brute force only Langford's elite team of hackers could provide. Elon watched as the subnet began to stabilize. The encrypted data was streaming across the nodes, reaching people in their homes, on their phones, and on their tablets. In the blink of an eye, the truth about the covert operations, the court system manipulation, and the shadowy dealings of Langford's allies was flooding the public consciousness. It was overwhelming. But in the back of his mind, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. At that moment, Langford's counterattack began. "Activate the breach," Langford ordered his team. The command sent waves of disruption through SpaceX's infrastructure. The firewall that had been holding the subnet's data safe was now under attack. Langford's team of hackers, equipped with the most sophisticated AI-based algorithms, was targeting the very foundation of the subnet itself. For a brief moment, Elon's screen flashed with red warnings. "It's happening," Lang said, his voice tinged with alarm. "They've breached the first layer." Gwyn's face was grim as she looked at the data coming in. "Can we hold them off?" "We can try," Elon said, but he knew that their resources were stretched thin. If Langford's team got through, they would not only shut down the subnet but also have access to everything, from Elon's private data to the very heart of the upload protocols. Back at Langford's command center, his team worked with ruthless precision. They knew that this was the moment that would decide everything. With every keystroke, they chipped away at the layers of encryption that had once been unbreakable. Langford smiled coldly as he watched the progress. "This is it," he muttered. "This is where the world goes back to normal." In the war room, Elon and his team were frantically working to plug the breach. But with every minute that passed, the hackers were getting closer to taking control. "We've got a problem," Lang said, his voice urgent. "They've deployed an AI-based worm. It's slowly consuming everything." "Then we counter with a counter-worm," Gwyn suggested. Something faster. Lang gritted his teeth. I can't code one that fast. We'll have to use something experimental. Elon, his eyes fixed on the screen, thought for a moment. Then he turned to Lang. Do it. We don't have a choice. Lang nodded, typing furiously as the seconds ticked by. The AI-based worm they were fighting against wasn't just targeting the subnet, it was designed to learn, adapt, and grow stronger with every move. This was the final showdown, the moment where the fate of the world's information systems would be determined. Outside, the world was still on edge. People had begun to notice that their devices weren't working as they should. The blackout was still in effect, but the truth that had already been unleashed continued to spread through the underground network. The longer the battle raged, the more people began to trust the messages they were receiving. They were hungry for answers. And in some places, it wasn't just a desire for information anymore. It had become a demand for action. Back in the command center, Elon watched as Lang typed in the final command to deploy the counterworm. The process was agonizingly slow. Every millisecond counted. But then, finally, there was a flash of green on the screen. The counterworm was live. The subnet began to shift. Langford's team in their underground facility had realized too late that they were losing ground. The worm they had unleashed was being undone by Elon's countermeasure, which was faster and more adaptive. Their screens blinked with error messages, as the AI's learning algorithm began to falter. It wasn't supposed to be possible, but it was happening. We're losing it, one of Langford's hackers shouted. Langford slammed his fist onto the table. No. Get it under control, now. But it was too late. The counterworm was consuming their system faster than they could stop it. The breach had been countered. Elon watched from his console, feeling a surge of relief. The subnet was stable. For now, the truth was safe. But as he looked around at the people in the room, he knew that they couldn't rest. Langford wouldn't give up. He would adapt, just as they had. But Langford wasn't out of options yet. As the breach was contained, he activated his final contingency plan, Project Exile. If Valkyrie couldn't shut them down, then he would do what he did best, erase the evidence entirely. He had another tool at his disposal, one that no one expected. A final strike that would cut off the subnet's connection to the world. A global blackout that would leave everyone in the dark, no matter how much data Elon's team had pushed through. As the countdown began again, this time, to the next stage of the war, Elon knew that he was up against more than just technology. He was up against a system that had been years in the making, a system designed to survive anything. But this time, the world was watching. And the fight wasn't over. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The storm that had been gathering for hours was finally here. Langford, in his underground facility, had made his move. He had initiated Project Exile, a plan so secret, so dangerous, that even his most trusted allies hadn't known about it until the moment they needed it. It wasn't just another firewall. It wasn't just another hack. Project Exile was a global shutdown, a complete severance from the outside world. It was an information vacuum, a digital silence that would bring everything to its knees. Elon was watching the digital battlefield unfold in real time. The subnet was still operational, but Langford's attack was imminent. He had already heard rumors of a new global blackout, but this was something far worse than anything they had faced before. We need to stop it, Gwyn said, staring at the screens where Langford's plan was coming to life. Lang was already several steps ahead, his fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. I'm trying to deploy a firewall override, but it's not working. This is beyond anything we've faced. Project Exile is designed to cut off everything. Satellites, data lines, power grids. It'll leave the entire world in the dark. Elon's mind raced. The data they had pushed through the subnet was the truth, the world's last hope of exposing Langford's corruption. Without the subnet, there would be no way to spread it. No way to undo the damage Langford had already done. This wasn't just about fighting for control anymore. This was about survival. If this goes through, we lose, Elon said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. We need to create a decoy, a shadow network. Something that'll stay hidden long enough to keep the truth alive. Lang glanced up from his screen, his face grim. There's no time. The blackout is already in motion. The first waves targeting every satellite in orbit. Outside, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The sun was setting over the horizon, but the world was growing darker in a far more literal sense. People in cities around the globe looked up to the skies, only to see the stars fading behind dark clouds. At first, they thought it was a storm, but then the power flickered out. Phones, computers, cars, everything went silent. It was as if the world had suddenly lost its pulse. In homes and offices, people were already feeling the weight of what had happened. They could still feel the ghost of the truth they had glimpsed through the subnet, but it was quickly slipping away. They had no idea who or what was behind this new blackout. They just knew that something huge was happening. In a small cafe in New York, a woman held up her phone, staring at the spinning loading symbol. "What is going on?" she muttered to herself. Her screen froze, and then the message came through, "No network." She wasn't alone. People all around the world were feeling the same confusion and fear. But no one knew just how deep the problem went. Back at SpaceX, the urgency was palpable. Elon and his team were scrambling to find a solution. They couldn't afford to waste time. "We need a plan B," Gwynn said. "And we need it now." Lang had already begun coding a counter-exile plan, an attempt to break through Langford's grip on the system. But the AI that powered Project Exile was like a living, breathing entity, one that evolved with every new attempt to stop it. The more Elon's team tried to counteract it, the more the system adapted. "They're rewriting the rules as we go," Lang said, sweat beading on his forehead. "This isn't just a global blackout. They're hijacking every communication network. They're disabling the world's ability to talk to itself. We won't be able to get messages out. We won't even be able to call for help." Elon's mind raced. There had to be something more they could do. He looked over at Gwynn. "We've got to go underground. We have to deploy our own mesh network, one that can't be detected." Lang nodded. "But that will only work for a small group. If we're going to keep the truth alive, we need to infiltrate Langford's system from within. We need to find his central server." The clock was ticking. Every minute that passed brought them closer to losing everything. Langford was watching from his facility, his lips curling into a grim smile. He had already seen the disruption caused by Project Exile. It was everything he'd hoped for. The subnet was fading, their network of resistance was crumbling, and the world's information was being erased. In his mind, Langford had already won. But what Langford didn't know, what no one knew, was that Elon had one final trick up his sleeve. A last-ditch effort that could turn the tables. "We'll bypass the firewalls entirely," Elon said, his voice steady. "There's one thing Langford didn't account for. The human element." "What do you mean?" Gwynn asked, confused. Elon grinned, his eyes glinting with resolve. "We don't need to fight the system on their terms. We need to fight it on ours." He turned to Lang. "Get me access to every social media platform. We're going to break the blackout with the people. Let the world fight back." As Lang began coding, Elon set his mind to work. The subnet wasn't just a technological breakthrough. It was the world's last stand, and it wasn't over yet. Meanwhile, Langford's plan continued to unfold. The first wave of the blackout was now complete, and the global digital infrastructure was beginning to crumble. The power grids were being targeted, leaving cities in darkness. The satellites were being disabled, cutting off any hope of recovery. But in the shadows, Elon's team was already on the move. They couldn't fight back in the conventional way, not anymore. Now, they had to do something unexpected. Something bold. Langford had underestimated one thing: the strength of the human spirit. The blackout had spread like wildfire. Across the world, millions of people found themselves trapped in an unexpected silence. Cities were plunged into darkness, phones were rendered useless, and communications came to a grinding halt. But amid the chaos, Elon's mind was racing. He knew the world couldn't survive in isolation for long, especially not when they were so close to breaking through. The only way out was for the people to fight back. Not with violence, not with anger, but with the most powerful weapon they had, their voice. Elon paced back and forth in the command center, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The world was dark, but he knew that they had something Langford couldn't foresee: the people's capacity for change. "Lang, get me the keys to every major social media platform," Elon said, his voice calm but urgent. "We're going to make the world listen." Lang blinked in confusion. "What do you mean?" "The blackout is cutting off access to everything. The networks are barely functional." Elon smiled, an edge of determination in his expression. "They're still there. People are still connected, even if they can't see it. If we can just get the message out, the people will do the rest." Gwyn stepped forward, her eyes sharp with understanding. "You want to use social media as a beacon? As the only lifeline left?" Elon nodded. "Exactly. The world has lost its connectivity, but it hasn't lost its need for truth. If we can plant the seed, they'll start questioning everything. They'll fight back on their own terms." In the midst of the growing darkness, a few brave individuals had managed to keep their phones running. Their screens were frozen, their apps malfunctioning, but they were still alive with data. And in the cracks of the system, Elon saw an opportunity. It wasn't about taking back the internet. It was about creating a spark. A single post, a hashtag, a call to action. If enough people saw it, they would share it. They would demand answers. The battle for the subnet wasn't just about technology. It was about reshaping the way the world connected, through the very medium that Langford had tried to control. Elon knew that if they could get the people to believe in the truth, the world could become a force too powerful for Langford to silence. Hours later, Elon and his team were ready. Lang's fingers flew over the keyboard, setting up a hidden broadcast, something that could bypass Langford's control. The message was simple, but powerful: the truth is out there. It's in your hands now. Spread the word. Within minutes, the message was live. It was distributed across encrypted channels, reaching thousands. People began to share it, and with every share, it snowballed. In a small town in the Midwest, a teenager named Ryan was watching the news feed on his phone when he saw the message. He had no idea what it meant, but something inside him clicked. He shared it. And then, a few minutes later, his friends started sharing it too. Across the globe, in cafes and living rooms, people began doing the same. They didn't have all the answers, but they knew one thing: they couldn't stay silent any longer. The world's silence was only adding to the fear, and they weren't going to let that fear control them. Meanwhile, Langford was watching in his underground facility. The broadcast had made it through. His worst fear had materialized. The truth, the one thing he had worked so hard to suppress, was now out in the open. He cursed under his breath. How did they? He slammed his fist on the console. It wasn't supposed to be like this. But it was too late. The message was spreading like wildfire, and it wasn't stopping. As the first few hours passed, the world began to respond. People who had once been passive consumers of information were now active participants in the fight for truth. They were sharing the message, talking about it, demanding answers from their governments, their leaders, their corporations. In the streets of Paris, people gathered in small groups, comparing notes and discussing what they had learned. In Tokyo, protesters gathered near government buildings, their voices rising in unison, chanting for accountability. From the remote villages of Africa to the bustling cities of Latin America, the ripple effect was undeniable. The system that Langford had carefully crafted, a world of silence and control, was unraveling faster than he could contain it. Back at SpaceX, Elon watched the live feed of social media reactions, his heart pounding with a strange combination of hope and dread. They had done it. The people had taken the first step. But now, they had to keep the momentum going. "This is just the beginning," Elon said, staring at the screen. "We need to organize. We need a coalition of voices. We need to keep the truth flowing, no matter what." Gwyn was by his side, her eyes scanning the responses. "It's spreading faster than I expected. The people are starting to demand action. They're asking for transparency." Lang turned to Elon. "But can we sustain it? Langford's not just going to let this slide." Elon's face hardened. "Langford doesn't have a choice anymore. The people have spoken. And once they do, there's no going back." Across the world, people were posting, commenting, sharing. They were no longer just passive bystanders. They were active participants in a new movement. The blackout had been the beginning of the end, but the truth had sparked a revolution, one that could not be stopped. In the small town where Ryan had first seen the message, he sat at his computer, watching the reactions unfold. He could feel the world changing, and for the first time in his life, he felt like he was a part of something bigger than himself. Langford's system, designed to control the narrative, was beginning to fracture. The people were no longer just information consumers. They were information creators. And in doing so, they had taken back the one thing Langford had tried to steal from them, their voice. The world was changing. What had started as a whisper, a single post in the depths of the internet, had now grown into a thunderous roar. From the remotest villages to the largest cities, people everywhere were united by one singular truth: they had been lied to. Langford's empire of control was crumbling, piece by piece, and he knew it. At his underground facility, Langford paced back and forth, his mind racing as he monitored the global uprising. His screens flickered with notifications, each one showing the spread of the message Elon had orchestrated. Across social media, in public spaces, on every possible channel, the cry for transparency, accountability, and truth was gaining momentum. It was no longer just a resistance. It was a revolution. "They're organizing," Langford muttered under his breath. "How did they?" He slammed his fist on the desk. How could this happen? Langford had been prepared for a lot of things: a financial crash, a political scandal, even a few well-placed attacks on his operations. But this was different. He hadn't expected the people to fight back, not like this. He never expected them to rise. At SpaceX, Elon, Gwyn, and Lang were watching the developments unfold. The message was no longer just a ripple, it was a tsunami. People were mobilizing, creating decentralized networks of communication, bypassing the blackout with their own ingenuity. The blackout that Langford had initiated was starting to backfire. Instead of silencing them, it had only made the people more determined to be heard. "This is bigger than I thought," Gwyn said, her voice full of awe and concern. "The people are becoming their own voice." Elon was quiet for a moment, his eyes scanning the growing web of social media posts, encrypted messages, and underground resistance groups that were forming by the minute. It was more than just a political movement now. It was a cultural shift. People were awake. Lang leaned forward. "We're close. The world is listening. But if we're going to beat Langford, we need to take back the systems he controls. We need to destroy his ability to manipulate information." Elon nodded. "I've been thinking about that. We don't fight Langford's system by taking it down. We build something better. Something they can't control." Meanwhile, the revolution was taking root in the hearts of millions. Protesters filled the streets of major cities. In New York, they gathered in the thousands, chanting for justice and accountability. In London, people stood outside government buildings, demanding an explanation for the blackout. In Sydney, a group of young tech-savvy rebels set up a network that bypassed Langford's restrictions, allowing others to communicate freely. But it wasn't just about the protests. The real power was in the collective will of the people. They had tasted the truth, and they were hungry for more. They weren't just resisting the system, they were creating a new one. The systems that Langford had built to control the flow of information, his financial networks, his digital monopolies, his AI algorithms, were no longer enough to keep them down. Back at SpaceX, Elon was preparing for the next phase of the revolution. He knew that if they were going to defeat Langford, they needed a platform. A space where people could continue sharing the truth, building on the momentum of the uprising. They needed something decentralized, something the system couldn't take down. It's time to create the people's network, Elon declared. A network that's untouchable. A space for truth. It'll be a new world, built by the people. Gwyn looked at him, intrigued. How are we going to pull that off? Langford's got the whole digital infrastructure. He can block anything that goes online. Elon smiled, a spark of confidence in his eyes. We won't use the infrastructure he controls. We'll rebuild from the ground up. We'll create a network that's impossible for them to control. It'll be based on encrypted peer-to-peer connections, using the very same principles that made the internet what it was meant to be. Lang nodded. Decentralized. Open source. Completely transparent. Exactly, Elon said. The people will own it. They'll govern it. And Langford will have nothing left to control. Elsewhere, in the heart of the resistance, Ryan, the teenager from the Midwest, was watching the chaos unfold from his small town. His phone was still running, though it was barely functional with all the disruptions happening around the world. But even as the blackout had taken over, Ryan could feel the surge of energy, of change. He knew this was it, the moment when everything would be different. He wasn't a leader. He wasn't a politician. But as he scrolled through the messages, watching as more and more people around the world shared the truth, he realized that he was part of something bigger than himself. Ryan wasn't alone. He never had been. All over the world, millions of people were waking up. They were no longer passive consumers. They were the driving force behind the revolution. And they were ready for change. Langford's empire was falling apart. He could feel it. Every minute that passed brought the people closer to breaking through his final defenses. He was no longer in control of the narrative. The message was out, and the people had seized it. But Langford wasn't finished yet. He still had one final weapon at his disposal, the AI system. The very one that had helped him consolidate his power in the first place. It had been designed to adapt and evolve, to protect him from any threat. He pressed a button, initiating the final stage of his plan. The AI system was about to be deployed in full force. It would track every social media post, every online conversation, every action the resistance took. It would predict their movements and shut them down before they could even act. But Langford knew it wasn't just about the technology anymore. The revolution had gone beyond that. It was in the people's hearts, and that was something even his AI couldn't predict. As the people's voices grew louder, Elon and his team prepared for the final showdown. The systems were still under Langford's control, but the people's determination had made one thing clear: the truth would not be silenced. The revolution was awakening, and it was unstoppable. The world had entered the calm before the storm. Langford's AI system was now fully operational, silently scanning and analyzing every piece of data in its path. The machine's algorithms were designed to predict the resistance's every move. It was supposed to be invincible, an intelligence beyond the reach of any human force. But what Langford didn't realize was that the very thing he had underestimated was the key to his downfall: human resilience. Elon's team sat in the war room, watching the data streams from around the world. The revolution was gaining ground by the hour, but so was Langford's control. The battle for the future had shifted from the physical streets to the digital frontlines. Gwyn leaned forward, her brow furrowed. We're getting close, but Langford's AI is tightening its grip. If we don't do something soon, the people's network will be wiped out. Lang looked up at the screens. Elon, what's the plan? We need to strike now, while we still have a chance. Elon's gaze was intense, focused. We need to go directly to Langford. The AI is just a tool, he's the one pulling the strings. If we take him down, we take down everything. But he's got the AI, Lang countered. We can't outsmart a machine that sees everything. Not everything, Elon said, his voice unwavering. Langford's AI can predict actions, but it can't predict human will. It can't understand why we fight, what drives us to keep going. That's something the machine will never compute. Lang nodded, understanding the gravity of Elon's words. So we go after Langford directly? Elon nodded. Exactly. We need to give people the final push they need. It's not just about breaking the system, it's about showing them that they can. We need to expose Langford for who he really is. The team quickly gathered their resources, preparing for their final assault. They had no illusions about the difficulty of the task ahead. Langford was an intelligent, calculating man, and his empire had been built on the strength of AI and secrecy. But now, he was up against something far more powerful than any algorithm, the collective strength of the people, a force that Langford had never anticipated. Meanwhile, Langford sat in his darkened command center, his fingers moving furiously over the keyboard. The AI system was doing its job, tracking every message, every movement of the resistance. But as he watched, his confidence began to wane. There was something off, something he couldn't quite understand. The system was predicting the resistance's movements with accuracy, but there was a chaos to their actions, a randomness that the AI couldn't process. It was as if the resistance had become unpredictable. Elon's team was closing in on their target. They had located Langford's private facility, the heart of his empire, where the AI's core was housed. It was heavily guarded, a fortress designed to be impenetrable. But Elon knew that the key to breaking it wasn't brute force, it was ingenuity. We'll use the same decentralized network we've been building, Gwyn said, her eyes sharp with focus. We'll infiltrate from multiple points. No one will know where the attack will come from. Lang turned to Elon. Are we ready? Elon's expression hardened. We're ready. The people are ready. As the team prepared for the final push, the first wave of resistance began to move. They were the digital warriors, the ones who had been spreading the truth, the ones who had given the world hope. The decentralized network of truth-tellers was alive with energy. Every click, every share, every message, it was all part of a carefully coordinated effort to breach Langford's defenses. The world's eyes were now on the resistance. People were watching, waiting, hoping. Elon knew that they had to act swiftly, before Langford's AI could adapt and shut them down. Inside the facility, Langford's monitors blinked as the first wave of digital attacks began to hit. His face paled as the AI flagged the breaches in its defenses. He had anticipated this, but he hadn't expected the scale of the assault. They were everywhere, in the system, in the data streams, bypassing every security measure he had put in place. How is this happening? Langford muttered, his voice tinged with panic. But even as the AI worked to isolate the breaches, Langford knew he was running out of time. The resistance was no longer just a nuisance. It was a movement. And movements couldn't be stopped by firewalls or algorithms. Elon's team had reached the heart of Langford's empire. They were in the facility, hacking into the central servers, planting the virus that would destroy Langford's control systems. Each click was another step toward the ultimate goal, the downfall of the man who had manipulated the world for so long. We're in, Lang said, his voice steady but filled with tension. The virus is uploading. Good, Elon replied, his mind focused on the task ahead. Once it's done, the system will crumble. Langford won't have any control left. Back in Langford's command center, the AI was frantically attempting to adapt. It was running calculations, trying to isolate the resistance's influence. But it was too late. The virus had already spread, and the system was beginning to shut down. Langford stood up from his chair, his face twisted in disbelief. No. No, this can't be happening. The AI was his last line of defense, and it was failing him. As the system began to crash, Elon's team made their move. They stormed the facility, breaking into Langford's private chambers, where he stood frozen, watching his empire fall apart. Elon was the first to speak. Langford. It's over. Langford turned to face him, his eyes wild with anger and fear. You think you've won? You've only delayed the inevitable. The system is already too deep, too powerful. You'll never erase it. Elon stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. The system was never the problem. The problem was believing that one man could control everything. It's over for you, Langford. The people have spoken. And they won't stop. In that moment, Langford knew the truth. It wasn't the AI that had given him power. It was the people's compliance. And now, as the system collapsed around him, he understood that no machine could ever replace the will of millions of people, united by one truth. The world felt different now. The air was thick with uncertainty, but it was the kind of uncertainty that came with a fresh beginning, the kind of uncertainty that offered hope. Elon, Gwyn, Lang, and the rest of their team stood outside Langford's crumbled empire. The digital walls that once contained the world's truth had been torn down. The systems of control that Langford had spent decades building were now lying in ruins, dismantled by the very people they had oppressed. There was no celebration, no victory chance. Just a quiet, powerful sense of relief that the battle was over. But the work was far from finished. We've torn down the system, Gwyn said, her voice full of resolve. Now we need to rebuild it. Elon nodded. We don't rebuild what was broken. We create something better. A system that's transparent, that belongs to the people. The truth, the one thing Langford had tried so desperately to control, was now free. It was scattered, fragmenting into millions of voices, but in that very disarray was the seed of something powerful. The people had their voices back, and they weren't going to be silenced again. The first step of the revolution's new phase was a declaration that would resonate across the globe, a promise to the people who had fought so hard to bring about change. We must restore the balance, Elon said during a live broadcast to the world. What we've done isn't about destroying the old, it's about creating a new way forward. A way where we are all equal. Where truth, transparency, and collective power are the foundation of everything. As Elon spoke, Gwyn, Lang, and other key figures in the revolution stood by his side. People were listening. The message had resonated. The fear of a new order had dissipated, and in its place, people saw a future of possibility. In cities across the world, governments were scrambling to adapt. They couldn't ignore the people any longer. The institutions that Langford had built his empire on were collapsing, and in their place, a new digital democracy was rising. It wasn't without challenges. The people's network had to be refined, protected from those who would exploit it for their own gain, but the groundwork was laid. Ryan, the young rebel from the Midwest, was part of that change. His voice, once a whisper in the digital noise, had now become one of the loudest in the conversation. He had gone from a teenager with nothing to a symbol of the revolution. And now, he was part of the team shaping the future. Is it really over? Ryan asked as he joined Elon and the team in a digital meeting. I mean, we've won, right? Langford's gone. But what now? What happens next? Elon leaned forward, his face softening. What happens next is up to all of us. We have a chance to create something better, Ryan. This is just the beginning. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of negotiations, agreements, and, yes, conflict. Not everyone was on board with the changes. Former allies of Langford were now scrambling to regain their influence, and some governments, while publicly supportive of the revolution, secretly plotted to restore the old order. The world was at a crossroads, and while the power of the people was undeniable, the road ahead was far from clear. "We need to keep the momentum going," Gwyn said as they discussed their strategy moving forward. "The more people see that the world is changing, the harder it will be for anyone to stop it." Lang agreed. "But we also need to be realistic. People are scared. They've been living in a controlled world for so long that the sudden freedom is overwhelming. We need to guide them." At the same time, the AI systems that Langford had once relied on were being reprogrammed. They were being repurposed not to control the population, but to enhance it. The same technology that had been used to oppress was now being used to empower, allowing for greater connectivity and access to information, but with the safeguards built in by the people. "This is what it was supposed to be," Lang said as he worked with the team to modify the AI. "An open, transparent network where knowledge is shared, not hidden. A system built on trust." Elon nodded. "We're not perfect, but we're getting closer." As weeks turned to months, the effects of the revolution began to show. In the streets, the atmosphere was one of cautious optimism. People were taking back their cities, reclaiming their communities. Small businesses, once stifled by Langford's monopolies, were flourishing. New industries were emerging, industries based on collaboration, on creativity, on the collective good. But not everyone was on board. In the halls of power, there were whispers of rebellion. Langford's closest allies had gone underground, hiding in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike back. The AI systems had not been completely neutralized, and remnants of the old regime still lurked in the digital world. But every day, the people were becoming more organized, more united. Ryan stood on the roof of a building, overlooking the city. It had been months since the fall of Langford's empire, and the world was a different place. But the fight wasn't over. The battle for control, for truth, for freedom, was ongoing. "It's like we've woken up from a long dream," Ryan said to his friend, an old resistance comrade who stood next to him. "I never thought we'd actually make it here. But now, it feels like the real work is just beginning." His friend smiled, a sense of quiet determination in his eyes. "The revolution doesn't end with the fall of one man, Ryan. It's about the people. It's about us. The question is, what kind of world do we want to build?" Ryan took a deep breath, looking out over the skyline, filled with promise. "A world where the people are in charge. A world where truth is the foundation. A world that's not controlled by anyone but us." As the sun set over a new world, the questions remained, but so did the hope. The world was forever changed, and the revolution was far from over. The dawn of a new era had begun, but the path forward would depend on the choices of every single person. And one thing was certain, no one would ever be controlled again. The streets were alive with the sound of construction, the clang of metal, the hum of machines, and the voices of people determined to build something new. The world had changed, but the task ahead was far from simple. Elon stood in the heart of the newly formed People's Network headquarters, surrounded by his closest allies. The walls were filled with screens, showcasing data, communication, and resources that were being decentralized and redistributed to every corner of the globe. The system was now a living, breathing organism, built by the people for the people. But as the revolution had shown, progress was rarely linear. "There's still so much work to be done," Gwyn said, her tone a mixture of frustration and resolve. "We've dismantled Langford's empire, but now we have to create something sustainable. A system that doesn't just work but works for everyone." Lang sat across from her, typing rapidly on a holographic screen. "I'm starting to see a pattern. As much as the AI systems were controlling the flow of information, they were also efficient. We're facing inefficiency now. Without a clear leadership structure, resources are getting spread thin. Elon listened closely, nodding. That's where we're getting stuck. We've promised the world a transparent system, but transparency doesn't work without direction. Right now, it feels like we've set fire to the old world, but the new one hasn't fully taken shape. Across the globe, the remnants of Langford's empire had scattered into small pockets of resistance. While the majority of the population celebrated their newfound freedoms, these pockets, like ghosts in the system, weren't ready to let go of the old ways. Some continued to leverage the remnants of Langford's AI to manipulate and control, working from the shadows. Ryan, who had become a symbol of the revolution's success, now found himself in the heart of this challenge. As he walked through the streets of the New York sector, a district that had seen some of the most significant uprisings, he could feel the pressure mounting. People were impatient, and though they had won the battle, they were now waiting for the fruits of their struggle to appear. The change hadn't been as immediate as everyone had hoped. New systems were being built, but they didn't have the same immediate impact that Langford's empire had promised. People were beginning to question if they had traded one form of control for another. Ryan could sense the unease. "I thought things would be better by now," he admitted to his friend, walking beside him down the bustling streets. "The streets are still full of people, but there's no one guiding them. No clear path." His friend, a fellow former rebel named Mark, nodded in agreement. "It's not going to be easy. Change like this isn't something that can happen overnight. We've got to give it time. People need to believe in what we've created, but they need to see it working first." Ryan sighed, his gaze drifting over the horizon. "I get that, but how much longer can we afford to wait?" Back at the headquarters, Elon and Gwyn were deep in discussion. They had been working tirelessly to stabilize the system, but cracks were starting to appear. As they had feared, without the centralized control that Langford's AI had provided, the people's network was starting to show signs of fragmentation. "The system is becoming too democratic," Gwyn said, her voice tinged with concern. "Everyone has a say, but no one's in charge. We don't have a unified direction, and resources are getting stretched too thin. There's no clear roadmap to keep things on track." Elon rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of the responsibility pressing down on him. "We can't let the system become chaotic. We need to establish some structure, but it has to be one that remains inclusive. No one wants to see another autocracy emerge." Lang joined the conversation, his voice steady but with a hint of concern. "What about the people? They want answers. They want results. If we don't give them direction, someone else will." That night, Elon couldn't sleep. He sat at the edge of his bed, staring at the city skyline, watching as lights flickered across the horizon. It was beautiful, but it was also fragile. He had been through many battles in his life, but this was different. This wasn't about conquering a market or building a company. This was about rebuilding the very fabric of society, and it was clear now that the revolution wasn't over. It was just beginning. The following morning, as Elon and his team met to discuss their next steps, a troubling report came in. Some factions, still loyal to Langford's ideals, had started to regroup. They weren't large enough to pose an immediate threat, but their influence was growing. The fear of losing control was beginning to turn into action. "We need to reach out to the people," Gwyn said, standing at the head of the table. "We need to remind them of what we're trying to build. If we don't act quickly, these rogue groups could take hold of the narrative, and that's the last thing we want." Lang nodded. "We can't allow the message of the revolution to be hijacked. We have to take back the narrative, remind everyone why we fought. People still believe in the cause, they just need to see that it's not lost." The plan was simple but risky. Elon and his team would go on a global tour, speaking directly to the people in the cities that had been most affected by the revolution. They needed to show the world that they were committed to building a better future, one where the people's voices were heard. The first stop was the heart of the revolution, New York City. Elon stood before the crowd, his face illuminated by the glow of the city lights. The crowd stretched out before him, thousands of eyes staring up, waiting for him to speak. It was his moment to remind them of the promise they had made to each other. This revolution isn't just about breaking down systems, Elon began, his voice steady, powerful. It's about rebuilding them. We have the opportunity to create a new world, one where every voice matters, where the future isn't dictated by a few. But I won't lie to you. It won't be easy. The road ahead is full of obstacles. But if we stand together, if we continue to work together, we can build a better future, for all of us. The crowd erupted in applause, but there was still a sense of uncertainty in the air. The people were listening, but they were also waiting for proof. They needed results, and they needed them soon. As the days passed, it became clear that the path to rebuilding would be far more complicated than anyone had anticipated. There were new challenges, resistance groups, misinformation campaigns, and a system still trying to find its footing. The world had been forever changed, but the true test was yet to come. Elon knew that the revolution was never just about tearing down the old world. It was about creating a new one. And that, he realized, would be the greatest challenge of all. The sound of the people's network crackling with static was becoming all too familiar. Across the globe, reports of unrest were flooding in. While many cities continued to embrace the changes brought by the revolution, others were beginning to show signs of fracture. In the heart of the new capital, Elon sat in a darkened room, his face illuminated by the glow of the screens in front of him. Gwyn, Lang, and Ryan were there too, but the silence between them was palpable. "We knew it wouldn't be easy," Gwyn said, breaking the silence. "But this is a mess. The world's not as united as we thought." Elon stared at the reports flashing across his screen. The fractures were growing, resistance cells were multiplying, misinformation was spreading faster than the truth, and in several cities, protests were erupting again. People were angry, confused, and frustrated. "The systems we've put in place are being exploited," Lang said, his voice tight with frustration. "It's like the digital infrastructure we built for good is now being used to manipulate and divide." Ryan clenched his fists. "So, what are we supposed to do? We fought for freedom, for unity. Now, it feels like we're falling apart." Elon exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "We knew this wouldn't be a perfect transition. Power is fragile, and the people who've held it for so long aren't going to give it up easily. But we can't let this spiral out of control." Elsewhere in the city, in a dark corner of the underground, a group of disillusioned revolutionaries gathered. These were once fighters for change, but now they were turning their backs on the very ideals they had once championed. They called themselves the Remnants, those who believed that the revolution had failed, that Elon and his team were just another group of elites in disguise. "We were promised a better world, but all we've gotten is chaos," said one of their leaders, a woman named Sophia, her voice sharp with bitterness. "The old system was broken, but this one is no better. We were promised equality, but instead, we're just as lost as we were before." Her words struck a chord with the group. The dream of a utopia where everyone had a voice, where power was shared, was starting to feel more like a distant fantasy than a tangible reality. The remnants weren't the only ones questioning the revolution. Former allies, too, were beginning to distance themselves from Elon and his team. A new figure had emerged in the global scene, a charismatic leader named Ivan Drax. Drax had once been a supporter of the revolution, an advocate for the people, but now he had turned against the very system he had helped create. His message was simple, and it was resonating with the disaffected: the revolution had failed, and it was time to rebuild again, but this time, with a stronger, more decisive leadership. Drax had rallied the disillusioned, the fearful, and the power-hungry, claiming that the world needed a stronger hand to guide it. "Weakness is not leadership," he preached. "The people want a future, not uncertainty." The catch was that Drax's future was one where he was at the helm. The tension between the people who had once stood united was growing. As Drax's influence spread, so too did the rift between those who believed in the revolution and those who felt betrayed by it. To many, Elon and his team were just another set of elites who had used their power to shift the world in their favor. They had created a system that allowed for too much freedom, too much chaos. What they needed now, they argued, was stability. Elon watched as Drax's movement gained momentum. It was frustrating. It felt like the world they had fought so hard for was slipping away from their grasp. But the hardest part? They were losing the people's trust. In a meeting with his closest allies, Elon finally spoke the words that had been weighing on his mind. The cracks are showing. Drax is out there, preaching to the disillusioned. Sophia and the remnants are gaining traction. If we don't act now, we might lose everything. Lang looked at him, his eyes clouded with uncertainty. What do you want us to do? We can't just take down Drax like we did Langford. We've built a new system. If we force things, we'll be just like the old regime. Gwyn shook her head. But we can't let him take control either. If Drax gets his way, we'll be back to square one. We'll be back to another power-hungry leader with no accountability. Ryan leaned forward, his expression serious. We need to find a way to unite the people again. The only way to win this is to show them what we've built. Show them that the revolution hasn't failed. Elon nodded slowly. But we need a plan, and we need it fast. The decision was made to launch a global broadcast, a message to the world, a rallying cry to remind everyone of the revolution's true purpose. The team began preparations, but the closer they got to the broadcast, the more dangerous things became. There were whispers of sabotage, of attempts to block the signal. Drax and the remnants weren't going to sit idly by. As Elon stood before the cameras, preparing to address the world once again, he couldn't shake the feeling that the stakes had never been higher. This wasn't just about power anymore. It was about saving the revolution, about showing the world that there was a way forward. He looked into the camera, the weight of the world pressing down on him. The revolution hasn't failed. But it needs all of us to succeed. We're not perfect, and we've made mistakes. But we've come too far to turn back now. The future isn't about a single leader or a single voice. It's about all of us, together. We can't let the darkness of doubt undo the light of hope. As the broadcast ended, the uncertainty hung in the air. Elon knew that the future was far from secure. Drax was out there, his influence growing, and the people were watching, waiting for the next move. The world stood at a crossroads, and the battle for the soul of the revolution had only just begun. The broadcast had sent shockwaves through the world, but as the days passed, it became clear, the revolution wasn't as secure as they had hoped. Drax's words were resonating with too many, his message of strong, centralized leadership offering a tempting simplicity to those frustrated with the chaos. The fractured unity Elon had fought for was now its greatest vulnerability. In the aftermath of the broadcast, the People's Network was flooded with new messages. Some were supportive, others were angry, and many were fearful. It was clear that the world was divided, and no amount of eloquent speeches could erase the growing distrust in the air. Elon sat at the head of the table in the war room, his face tired but determined. Gwyn, Lang, and Ryan were there, along with a few new faces, strategists, analysts, and leaders from different sectors who had joined the effort to stabilize the revolution. The numbers are clear, Lang said, tapping a few commands on the table's holographic interface. Drax is gaining ground. He's tapping into the frustration, playing on the fear that things are falling apart. His promise of a strong hand is appealing to people who feel like they're losing control. Ryan leaned back in his chair, a frown creasing his brow. We can't just attack him head-on. Drax is playing on emotions, on uncertainty. If we force a confrontation, we might give him what he wants. Elon nodded grimly. We've got to play this carefully. Drax's rhetoric is simple, he's offering certainty. We're offering, what? A vision. A dream. But dreams don't pay the bills, and they don't fix broken systems overnight. Gwyn's expression was pensive. What if the people don't want a dream anymore? What if they just want something real, something tangible. We need to show them that we are real, Elon said, his voice firm. We've spent too long building something idealistic. Now, it's time to show the world that our system can work. We need action. Immediate, visible progress. As the meeting progressed, a new strategy began to take shape. They couldn't simply dismiss Drax. That would only play into his narrative. Instead, they had to outmaneuver him by demonstrating the very thing that had made their revolution so powerful, collective action. The People's Network, built on decentralization, now needed to show it could bring real, immediate change. They couldn't afford to wait for a utopia to emerge, they had to prove that the new world was possible, and that it was working for the people. The decision was made, they would focus on the areas most affected by the revolution, the cities where tensions were the highest, the places that had become battlegrounds of ideology and fear. They would provide food, resources, jobs, anything to show the people that the new world was already beginning to work, that the system could provide for everyone, not just the powerful few. Meanwhile, Drax was not sitting idly by. His influence was growing, and he was using every tool at his disposal to capitalize on the fear and uncertainty that had taken root. Through slick media campaigns, well-funded rallies, and promises of safety and order, he was rallying the people who had grown tired of waiting for change. But Drax had a darker side. He wasn't just promising security, he was threatening the very foundation of the revolution. His ultimate goal was clear: power. He wasn't just a leader, he was a conqueror, using the people's frustrations as his stepping stones. Elon knew this, and it was exactly why he couldn't allow Drax to seize control. In a rare moment of calm, Ryan and Gwyn sat together on a rooftop overlooking the city. The world below was bustling with life, but the weight of the revolution was heavier than ever. "I've been thinking," Ryan said quietly, his voice carrying in the cool breeze. "What if we've been going about this all wrong? Maybe it's not about proving to the world that our system works. Maybe it's about showing them that we're still human, that we're still just people trying to make it work, just like they are." Gwyn turned to look at him, her eyes thoughtful. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said, "that maybe we've been so focused on the system, on the big picture, that we've forgotten to show the world the small, human stuff. The real connections. The everyday struggles and victories. People don't just want leaders, they want people they can trust." Gwyn smiled slightly. "That's not a bad idea. It's not just about proving our systems. It's about proving that we're with them. That we're all in this together." Ryan nodded. "Exactly. If we can rebuild the trust, if we can show them that we're not above them, but beside them, then maybe we can win this." With this new perspective in mind, Elon and his team shifted their approach. They started focusing on real, tangible projects in the most turbulent cities. They didn't just send resources, they sent people. The goal wasn't to give orders from the top down but to meet the people where they were, to work side by side with them to rebuild. The effort was grueling. They faced opposition at every turn. There were those who still believed in Drax's vision of strength, those who feared the chaos would return if the decentralized system wasn't brought under control. But there were also those who remembered why they had fought in the first place, for a world that listened, a world that was transparent, a world where no one was left behind. One of the first initiatives was the reconstruction of a collapsed district in Chicago. The area had been devastated during the height of the revolution, and many had abandoned it in the chaos. But now, Elon and his team, along with local citizens, were rebuilding from the ground up. They started by distributing food and medical supplies, organizing cleanup crews, and opening community centers. At first, the people were skeptical. But when they saw leaders like Ryan and Gwyn working alongside them, putting in the same hard hours and facing the same challenges, the mood began to shift. Slowly, trust began to rebuild. Elon watched the progress from afar, his mind still occupied by the looming threat of Drax. But as the days passed, he began to feel a sense of hope he hadn't experienced in a long time. The system wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. And they were making it work, one step at a time. However, the battle was far from over. Drax's campaign was growing more aggressive, and his influence continued to spread. Every day was a new challenge, a new test of their resolve. And with each passing day, Elon realized something crucial: the fight wasn't just about systems or power, it was about the people, their trust, and their future. The moment of truth had arrived. After weeks of building momentum on the ground, the revolution was now facing a clear and present threat. Drax had called for a nationwide summit. His message was direct and powerful: the revolution had failed, the system was broken, and he was the one to restore order. For weeks, Elon and his team had worked tirelessly to heal the rifts, to rebuild the trust that had been lost, but now it seemed like all of it could crumble in an instant. The world was watching, waiting for the next move. And Drax wasn't just waiting, he was preparing. In the war room, tension was high. Elon sat at the head of the table, his fingers pressed together as he looked over the reports. The numbers were undeniable: Drax was gaining ground, and fast. His rhetoric was powerful, resonating with the masses, offering them a clear path forward. His call for stability, for strength, had found an audience that had begun to question the new system Elon and his team had put in place. "They're ready for a showdown," Lang said, his voice strained. "This summit isn't just a meeting, it's Drax's play for power." Ryan clenched his fists, standing by the window. "We can't afford to let him frame this as a choice between chaos and order. It's a false dichotomy. People have to see it for what it is, a choice between freedom and control." Gwyn nodded, pacing the room. "But how do we prove that? Drax has the narrative, and we're still trying to rebuild credibility. We need to act fast, or we'll lose the momentum we've gained." Elon's mind raced. The clock was ticking, and they had no time to waste. Drax's supporters were rallying, growing stronger with each passing day. But in the midst of this crisis, Elon had a sudden realization. It wasn't just about presenting a counterargument to Drax's claims. It was about showing the people why the revolution mattered, why the fight for freedom, for equality, was worth it, no matter the cost. The summit, Elon realized, was an opportunity. An opportunity to expose Drax for what he truly was, a power-hungry leader looking to take advantage of the people's fear. But to do that, they would need more than just words. They needed proof. The plan was set in motion. Over the next few days, they would gather key representatives from cities across the world, from those who had felt the benefits of the revolution firsthand. These were ordinary people, citizens who had seen their lives improve thanks to the new systems in place. They would speak at the summit, sharing their stories with the world. But there was a catch: they couldn't simply rely on the good news. They needed to confront the failures, too. They needed to show the people that, yes, the system had flaws, but it was still better than the alternative. As the summit day arrived, the tension was palpable. A global audience was tuned in, and the leaders of the world were waiting. Elon stood backstage, watching the massive screens that displayed Drax's looming image on the other side of the stage. His supporters had packed the venue, their chants echoing in the hall. They were ready to fight for their version of the future. Gwyn came up beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "This is it, Elon. We can't back down now." Elon nodded, his face determined. "We show them what's possible. We show them who we really are, not just leaders, but human beings who believe in a better future." When the summit began, the room was filled with an electric atmosphere. Drax took to the stage first, his voice commanding, his words sharp and calculated. "The revolution has failed," Drax began, his tone unwavering. "We've seen the chaos, the disillusionment, the broken promises. This system doesn't work. The only way forward is with strong leadership, decisive action. The people need security, not empty dreams." His words were greeted with applause. The crowd was enthralled, swept up by his promise of stability. But then it was Elon's turn. He walked on stage, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He knew the stakes. The eyes of the world were on him, waiting for his response. The room was silent as he began. "The revolution hasn't failed," Elon said, his voice steady. "But it isn't perfect. Nothing ever is. We've made mistakes, we've faced challenges. But we're here, and we're building something real. The people who have benefited from this system, they're here, and they're speaking for themselves." One by one, representatives from cities around the world took the stage, sharing stories of how their lives had changed. A mother from New York spoke about the new healthcare system that had saved her child's life. A teacher from Brazil shared how education had become more accessible, giving children a chance at a better future. An entrepreneur from Kenya explained how new digital tools had allowed small businesses to thrive. The stories were powerful. They showed the heart of the revolution, ordinary people, coming together to build something better. But Drax was relentless. He shot back with accusations, calling their stories propaganda, and claiming that they were merely a distraction from the real problems facing the world. The tension between the two sides was growing, and the debate became increasingly heated. As Elon continued to speak, he realized that the summit had become more than just a debate. It had become a battle for the soul of the revolution. He wasn't just fighting Drax, he was fighting the world's doubts, the uncertainty that had crept into the hearts of the people. In the final moments of the summit, Elon made his last appeal to the world. "I know we're not perfect. But what we've built, what we're fighting for, it's worth it. It's worth the struggle. Because we can't go back. We can't go back to a world where power is hoarded by a few, where the people have no say. We have to keep pushing forward. We owe it to ourselves and to future generations." The room was quiet for a moment, the weight of his words hanging in the air. And then, something unexpected happened. The crowd, Drax's own supporters, began to murmur. Slowly, people started to stand. They weren't sure what to think, but they couldn't ignore what they had just heard. The voices of the people had a power that Drax's rhetoric couldn't match. The summit ended in a stalemate. Drax hadn't lost, but neither had Elon. The battle for the future wasn't over, but the momentum had shifted. As the delegates began to leave, Elon found himself standing alone, looking out over the city. The fight was far from over. But for the first time in weeks, he felt something stirring inside him, hope. The world was holding its breath. The summit had been a turning point. Elon and his team had managed to wrestle back a small but significant portion of the people's trust. Yet, as they stood on the brink of what would come next, they all knew the stakes had never been higher. Drax's power wasn't just political, it was psychological. He had seized upon the one thing that terrified the masses: fear. Fear of instability, fear of loss, fear of uncertainty. For many, his promise of a strong hand was a balm to their anxiety. And as much as Elon tried to focus on hope and unity, Drax's dark, authoritarian vision loomed large in the hearts of those who had lost everything. The war room buzzed with tension. The floor-to-ceiling monitors flashed with the latest reports: protests in major cities, violent clashes, and rallies calling for change. The world was teetering on the edge of chaos, and the once hopeful revolution was now a battleground for control. "We can't keep going like this," Lang said, his face drawn with exhaustion. Every day, Drax gains ground. His message is clear: people want order. They want certainty. They don't want to hear about idealistic visions anymore. They want a solution now. Gwyn slammed her fist on the table, her frustration palpable. "That's what we've been doing, though. We've been building solutions. Drax is selling them false hope, an illusion of control. If we give in now, everything we've fought for is lost." Ryan leaned back in his chair, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "What if we're not seeing the full picture here? What if we've been fighting for something that people no longer believe in? Maybe we're asking them to trust something they can't understand." Elon was silent, staring at the screen in front of him. The faces of the people, the ones who had believed in the dream, flashed before his eyes. He couldn't shake the thought that perhaps, just perhaps, they had failed. "Maybe we're asking for too much," he said quietly. "Maybe it's not about ideals anymore. Maybe it's about what we can offer right now. Maybe we need to think about what the people truly want: stability, safety, a way out of the chaos." Gwyn and Lang exchanged looks, unsure of what Elon was implying. But Ryan caught on immediately. "You don't mean?" "I mean we have to make a choice," Elon said, his voice resolute. "We can keep fighting for the dream of a better world, or we can provide something more immediate, a way to restore order. It's not what I wanted, but if we don't do something soon, we'll lose everything." The debate raged on for hours. Elon wasn't sure where to turn. If they chose to back down, if they agreed to Drax's vision of centralization and control, they would be trading freedom for security. But how much was that worth? Was a dream worth dying for? Was it worth sacrificing everything for something so intangible? "We don't have time for this," Gwyn finally said, her voice sharp. "We need a plan, and we need it now. Drax isn't going to wait for us to decide. He's already making his move." That night, as Elon lay awake in his bed, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing. The world, which had once seemed so full of promise, now felt heavy, uncertain. The revolution had been about hope, about creating a better future. But in the face of relentless opposition, he wondered if that dream was too fragile to survive. The next morning, the decision came. A large-scale offensive was launched, a direct assault on Drax's headquarters. This was it. The final push. A last-ditch effort to reclaim control and prove that their vision was worth fighting for. The streets outside the war room were quiet as the team prepared for the assault. It wasn't just a political battle now. It was personal. Elon knew that once they took this step, there would be no turning back. "We're not just fighting for power," he said to the group. "We're fighting for the future. If we lose this, it's over. Not just for us, but for everyone who believed in what we've built." Gwyn nodded. "We're all in. There's no other way." The operation began with military precision. Drax's forces were well prepared, and the fight was fierce. But this time, the revolution had something Drax didn't: the will of the people. As the offensive progressed, citizens from all corners of the globe began joining the fight, standing alongside Elon's team. It was a symbol of everything they had fought for: unity in the face of adversity, and the courage to defend what was right. As the day wore on, the tide began to turn. The revolutionaries fought not with weapons alone, but with the ideals they had always carried: freedom, justice, and equality. Then came the moment everyone had feared: a confrontation with Drax himself. The scene unfolded in a grand hall, a final battle of wits and will. Drax stood at the center of the room, his face hard and unyielding. His supporters stood behind him, their loyalty palpable. "You think you can defeat me?" Drax sneered. "I am the future. I offer them order, security, certainty. They'll follow me because they know I will give them what they need. You offer them dreams." Elon stepped forward, his voice unwavering. "I offer them a chance. A chance to be free. To be equal. To build something better together. You offer them control, but that comes at a price, the price of their freedom." Drax's eyes narrowed. "You think they care about freedom? You think they'll follow a dream that doesn't work? You've lost. This is over." For a moment, Elon thought he could see the cracks in Drax's facade. The doubt, the uncertainty. He knew that deep down, Drax wasn't offering certainty, he was offering fear. And fear was never the solution. "You're wrong," Elon said quietly. "The people will choose hope over fear, every time." The battle was far from over. But in that moment, Elon knew one thing: the revolution wasn't just about defeating Drax. It was about proving that a better world was possible. And no matter what it took, he would fight for that world. The final confrontation with Drax had left the world reeling. But the battle was far from over. The forces of fear and control had not yet given up, and the revolutionaries had only just begun to feel the weight of what their victory would truly mean. Elon stood at the window of the war room, staring out at the horizon. The streets below were flooded with people, ordinary men and women who had come to witness the final moments of the revolution. Some were hopeful, eager to see what the future would hold. Others were fearful, uncertain of the changes that had already begun to take shape. The revolution had been a long and brutal journey. But now, after all the sacrifices, it felt as though they were on the cusp of something far more significant than they could have imagined. Gwyn entered the room, her face tired but determined. She walked up to Elon, standing by his side as she gazed out over the city. "It's almost over," she said quietly. "We've done everything we can." The summit was the turning point. The people are finally starting to believe again. We just need to push through these last hours. Elon nodded, but there was a sense of apprehension in his eyes. It's not over yet. Drax still has his followers. He has the media, the power to incite fear. We can't just assume victory. But we've won the hearts of the people, Gwyn replied, her voice gaining strength. They see the truth now. Drax's vision was never about the people, it was about his own power. And no one follows that kind of leader for long. They know that now. The news from the front lines was grim, but there was also a sense of inevitability in the air. Elon's team had struck a decisive blow. Drax's forces were beginning to fall apart, and his supporters were beginning to waver. The momentum was shifting, but the final phase of the battle would take everything they had. We've fought for this moment for years, Ryan said, walking into the room with a look of determination on his face. But this is the moment will truly define the future. Everything we've done has led us to this. No more half measures. We finish this now. Elon looked at his team, each of them exhausted but resolute. This wasn't just about defeating Drax, this was about preserving the dream of a better world. A world built on unity, equality, and freedom. And that world was within their grasp. The final phase of the battle began with the people's uprising reaching a fever pitch. Everywhere, citizens were taking to the streets, tearing down symbols of Drax's regime. What had started as a small resistance movement was now a full-scale revolution, with the masses leading the charge. Elon's team had built a coalition that spanned continents, and the support for the revolutionaries had never been stronger. The winds of change were blowing, and the people were ready for it. Drax, cornered and desperate, launched a final attempt to hold on to his power. His followers, though dwindling, were still fiercely loyal. They began to rally around him, making a last stand against the revolution. In a final, desperate confrontation, Elon and Drax faced each other one last time. "You don't understand," Drax spat, his face twisted with anger. "You think you're saving the world. But you're just creating more chaos. People need a strong hand. They need order. You can't give them that, they'll destroy everything you've built." Elon stepped forward, his voice calm but unwavering. "You're wrong, Drax. What people need isn't order, it's freedom. Freedom to choose their own future, freedom to live without fear. You can control them with your lies, but you can never control their hearts." For a long moment, Drax said nothing. His eyes burned with fury, but there was a flicker of doubt in his gaze. "The people will never accept you," Drax finally hissed. "You can't change them. You can't change the world." Elon looked at him with a quiet, unwavering determination. "I don't have to change the world alone. I just have to show them that a better future is possible. And that's something you can never take away." The final battle was swift, but the impact was profound. Drax's forces crumbled, and his reign of fear came to a dramatic end. As the revolutionaries swept through the streets, the world watched as the symbol of tyranny fell. The people cheered, not just for victory, but for the promise of something more. Something better. It wasn't just the end of Drax's reign, it was the beginning of a new era. In the days that followed, the work of rebuilding began in earnest. The system of control that had once stifled progress was dismantled, and a new era of governance was ushered in. But this time, it wasn't led by a single figure, it was a collective effort. A new system was born from the ground up, one that truly represented the people. Elon stood with his team in the heart of the city, watching as the foundations of this new world were laid. They had fought for this moment, sacrificed everything for this vision, and now they were watching it come to life. Gwyn stood beside him, her face filled with pride. We did it. The dream we fought for is real. Elon looked out at the city, at the people who were rebuilding, who were starting to believe in the future again. This isn't just our victory, he said quietly. It's everyone's. We've shown them what's possible, and now it's their turn to build. As the sun set over the city, Elon felt a sense of peace settle over him. The revolution had been long and painful, but it had brought them here, to a moment of hope, to the dawn of a new era. They had made it. The future was no longer a distant dream. It was here. The city was a canvas of possibility. Elon stood on a rooftop overlooking the bustling streets below. The sun was just beginning to dip beneath the horizon, casting the city in a warm, golden hue. The chaos that had once consumed these streets was now replaced by something entirely new, a sense of hope, a sense of purpose. The revolution had reshaped the world in ways no one could have predicted. The people had risen up, torn down the old structures of fear, and rebuilt a society based on unity, freedom, and equality. But as much as Elon wanted to savor this moment of victory, he knew the real work had only just begun. Gwyn joined him on the rooftop, her expression thoughtful. It's hard to believe it's really happening, isn't it? After everything we've been through. Elon nodded, his gaze still fixed on the horizon. It feels like a dream. But I know this is just the beginning. We've won the battle, but now we have to build the future. Ryan and Lang arrived, their faces reflecting the same mixture of relief and exhaustion. The team had given everything for this moment, and they knew that their fight wasn't over. It had only transformed into something new. We've laid the groundwork, Lang said, looking out at the city. But the people have to take it from here. We've shown them the way, but they have to decide how they want to walk it. That's the real challenge, Ryan added. We've dismantled the old system, but it's up to them to decide what the new one looks like. And that means we can't just walk away. We have to stay engaged, guide them, make sure the dream stays alive. Elon turned to face his team, his expression resolute. We've made history. But the future is in their hands now. It's not about us anymore. It's about them, the people who believed, who fought alongside us. They have the power to create a world that's better than anything we ever imagined. The next few months were a whirlwind of change. Governments that had once been beholden to a single leader were now shifting toward more democratic systems, with citizen input and participation at every level. The economy, once driven by fear and inequality, was now focused on sustainability and collective growth. But change didn't come without its challenges. There were moments of uncertainty, debates over the direction the new world should take, and, as always, those who resisted the change, clinging to old ways and old power. In a rare moment of peace, Elon stood before the Global Assembly, a coalition of world leaders, activists, and everyday citizens who had come together to decide the future. He addressed the crowd, his voice steady but full of conviction. We've witnessed the power of unity. We've seen what happens when the people come together to demand change, to create a future that reflects their values. This new world will not be perfect, but it will be ours, shaped by our collective will, our shared dreams. And it will be a world where every voice is heard, every person is valued, and every dream is possible. The assembly erupted in applause. But Elon knew that applause was not the end. It was merely the start of something much larger, a world that had to continually evolve, a future that required constant work, dialogue, and determination. Back in the city, the signs of change were everywhere. New buildings rose from the rubble of the old regime. Green spaces flourished, providing areas for relaxation, education, and community building. Technology was used not just for profit, but for the betterment of society, ensuring that innovation served the needs of all, not just the few. In the streets, people no longer marched for change, they lived it. They collaborated, designed, and built, every person contributing to the world they had fought so hard to create. The revolution had succeeded because it wasn't just about tearing down the old systems. It was about imagining a new way of living and making that vision a reality. The ideals that Elon had championed from the very beginning, freedom, equality, sustainability, were now embedded in the fabric of society. But the real challenge lay ahead: how to ensure that these values were preserved, and how to keep the people engaged in the ongoing process of building a better world. Elon looked around at the people working together, the architects, the teachers, the scientists, the artists. They were all part of something bigger than themselves, a collective effort that would continue to shape the future. "We've created something extraordinary," he said to Gwyn as they watched the scene unfold. "But the true test will be in how we maintain it. The dream is alive, but we have to nurture it every single day." She smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. "And we will. We've learned that the future isn't given to us. It's built, piece by piece, person by person." Elon nodded, his heart swelling with pride. "Together, we can build a world that's not just for us, but for everyone. A world where no one is left behind. Where every person has the opportunity to thrive." As the sun set behind the city, Elon felt a profound sense of peace. The revolution had cost him everything: his time, his energy, his privacy, even his personal relationships. But in return, he had gained something far greater: the chance to shape the future. The world was no longer just a place to survive. It was a place to live, to grow, to dream. And as long as people like Elon, Gwyn, Lang, and Ryan, the ones who had believed in something better, continued to fight for that future, the revolution would never truly end. It was only just beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?